You didn't choose to feel like this. You didn't wake up and say, "Today, I want my chest to tighten for no reason." And yet, here it is, again, that familiar pressure, that voice whispering, "What if something goes wrong?" It's not logical. It's not helpful. And no matter how much you meditate, distract yourself, or try to think positive, it never really goes away. But what if the problem isn't you? What if anxiety isn't a malfunction, but a message? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, whose ideas still ripple through modern psychology, didn't believe worry was just a mental glitch. He believed it was something deeper, something older, a signal from the part of you that's been buried and is done being silent. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." He wasn't being poetic. He was sounding the alarm, because what we call overthinking, chronic anxiety, or mental noise might actually be your soul trying to get your attention. According to Jung, most people live disconnected from who they truly are, not because they're weak, but because they've spent years, maybe decades, being who the world told them to be. And in that split between the real you and the role you play, worry begins to grow, not randomly, not out of nowhere, but from a place inside you that's been waiting for you to stop running and start listening. So the question isn't, how do I stop worrying? The real question is, what is my worry trying to tell me? Because once you stop treating anxiety like the enemy, you might discover it was never there to hurt you. It was trying to bring you home. There's a quiet war happening inside you. Most people don't even realize it's there. They go about their lives checking boxes, performing routines, smiling when expected, all while something inside them grows more restless. It's not loud at first. It's a whisper, a tension, a low hum of unease they chalk up to stress or overthinking. But Carl Jung believed this wasn't just stress. It wasn't just overthinking. He believed it was the result of a fracture, a split between who you really are and who you've been conditioned to become. From the moment we're born, the world starts shaping us. We learn what gets praise and what gets punished. We're rewarded for being polite, agreeable, quiet, obedient, and slowly, without even realizing it, we start hiding the parts of ourselves that don't fit. The boldness, the curiosity, the anger, the sensitivity, the wildness. We tuck them away, telling ourselves, that part of me isn't safe here. Over time, this becomes automatic. And what's left? A carefully curated version of you, the version that gets approval. Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society. But behind that mask is the self, the real you, untouched by expectations, roles, or rules. And the more we identify with the mask, the more we lose contact with the self. That's when the anxiety begins to creep in. Because deep down, something in you knows. This isn't the full story. There's more to you than what you show. And the longer that truth stays buried, the louder the internal conflict becomes. Worry, then, is not random. It's not weakness. It's the fallout of an inner identity crisis. You've been taught to meet the world with a version of yourself that feels acceptable, digestible, non-threatening. But inside, the parts you've rejected are still alive. And they want out. They don't want revenge. They want recognition. They want integration. They want you to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. This is why anxiety often spikes when you're trying to be someone you're not. When you're performing, pretending, pushing down your truth. Jung didn't see worry as something to eliminate. He saw it as something to decode. A signal from your deeper self saying, "I'm still here." And the more you ignore that voice, the louder it gets. But if you start to listen, everything begins to change. You've probably heard the phrase facing your demons, but Carl Jung gave those demons a name, the shadow. He wasn't talking about horror stories or monsters hiding in the dark. He was talking about you, specifically the parts of you you've been taught to hide, suppress, or deny. Your anger, your sadness, your jealousy, your urges, your pain, the parts that made others uncomfortable, so you shoved them down in order to fit in. But here's the truth. They never went away. They just went underground. Jung believed that what we reject doesn't disappear. It becomes the shadow, a living, breathing part of our psyche that operates beneath the surface. And if left unacknowledged, it doesn't just sit quietly in the background. It influences your thoughts, your relationships, your self-worth, your fears. It colors how you see the world, how you respond to criticism, how you deal with intimacy or conflict. You might think, that's just the way I am. But in reality, it's the shadow pulling the strings. Worry, Jung believed, is one of the clearest ways your shadow tries to speak. It's not just mental noise. It's emotional smoke from a fire you've been taught not to look at. The shadow doesn't cause panic to hurt you. It causes panic to wake you up. It wants to be seen. Not because it's evil, but because it's you, the version of you that was silenced to survive. And survival has a cost, disconnection from the self. Think about it. That voice in your head that whispers, you're not good enough, or something bad is about to happen, doesn't come from nowhere. It's a wound, a memory, an old belief formed when you were too young to understand what was happening. That voice isn't crazy. It's historical. It's trying to protect you using the only tools it has: fear, doubt, hypervigilance. It doesn't trust the world because it once learned the world couldn't be trusted. And the more you try to silence that voice with distractions, affirmations, forced positivity, the more it resists. Not because it wants control, because it wants reunion. Jung didn't suggest we fight the shadow. He urged us to befriend it, to stop pretending it's not there. Because once you do, the shadow loses its grip. It stops controlling you from behind the scenes and starts guiding you toward wholeness. That's the paradox. The parts of you that seem darkest are the ones that can lead you back to the light. You don't just see the world, you filter it. Through memories, through past wounds, through beliefs you didn't even choose, and most of the time, you don't realize you're doing it. Carl Jung called this process projection, and it might be one of the most powerful and dangerous the things the human mind does without conscious permission. Projection happens when the unconscious parts of you, especially the rejected ones, don't just sit quietly in your psyche. They start appearing outside of you, disguised as the world around you. Suddenly, a harmless conversation feels threatening. A delay becomes a disaster. A simple mistake turns into a sign that you're a failure, not because reality has changed, but because the lens you're seeing it through is cracked. A crack formed long ago through betrayal, trauma, shame, neglect. And now every light that passes through it gets distorted. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That wasn't just spiritual wisdom. It was psychological strategy. Because the things that trigger you the most usually have less to do with the outside world and more to do with what's unhealed inside of you. When you feel intense anxiety over being judged, it might not be because people are judging you. It might be because somewhere along the way, you learned to judge yourself. And now, you assume the world is just doing the same. Anxiety often disguises itself as fear of the future, but at its core, it's usually an echo of the past. And the problem with echoes is they can be loud. So loud you forget they're not happening now. You carry that energy into every relationship, every opportunity, every risk. You don't see people for who they are. You see them as potential threats. You don't hear feedback. You hear failure. That's projection. Your shadow, acting like a filter on your lens, turning the whole world into a distorted mirror of your pain. But here's the power in that realization. If projection is unconscious pain made visible, then every anxious reaction becomes a map, a way back in, a chance to ask, why did this moment feel bigger than it was? What's it really connected to? That question alone can start to dismantle years of illusion. Because two people can face the same situation and have completely different emotional realities. One feels calm, the other feels like the world is collapsing. It's not about the event, it's about the lens. And once you change the lens, the whole world starts to look different. Sometimes it feels like you're reacting to things in ways that even you don't fully understand. You overthink a text message, spiral after a small mistake, or freeze up in situations that should be easy. And no matter how much you try to stay grounded, something takes over. That something, according to Carl Jung, might not be you. At least, not the you think you are. It could be what he called an autonomous complex, a hidden emotional landmine left behind by your past. A complex is not just a feeling. It's a psychological fragment, a piece of your psyche that's split off during a moment of pain, shame, fear, or trauma. That fragment didn't disappear. It became its own little program, buried deep within your unconscious, waiting to be triggered. And when it is, it hijacks your thoughts, emotions, and behavior like an invisible puppet master. Suddenly, your calm logic is gone, replaced by fear, rage, insecurity, or shame. You're not responding to the present, you're reliving the past. Jung saw these complexes as living entities within the psyche. They carry their own emotional energy, their own narratives. They form when something hurt too much to fully process at the time, so your mind buried it for survival. But buried doesn't mean healed. Those parts of you are still active, still afraid, still waiting. And anxiety. That's often the warning signal that one of these fragments is getting stirred up. For example, you might have a complex around abandonment. Maybe you were left emotionally or physically by someone you trusted. Now, even as an adult, the smallest sign of rejection lights up that old fear like a wildfire. You know you're safe. You know you're not that child anymore. But the complex doesn't. It reacts with all the intensity of that original wound. And unless you're aware of it, you'll mistake that inner panic for the truth. This is why self-awareness is so powerful. Jung didn't suggest we destroy these complexes. He believed in something deeper: integration. That means seeing these emotional hijackings for what they are, unhealed parts of your story. And the moment you notice them, really see them, you loosen their grip. The goal isn't to never feel anxious. The goal is to stop letting anxiety run your life from the shadows. Because once you understand that these reactions are coming from forgotten pain, not present danger, you reclaim your ability to respond instead of just react. And that's where real healing begins. Most people don't face themselves. Not really. They stay busy, productive, distracted. They chase goals, routines, and constant motion, not because they're truly driven, but because slowing down would mean feeling something. And that's terrifying. Carl Jung saw this everywhere. People clinging to surface-level solutions while quietly being torn apart inside. And he understood why, because what lives in the unconscious isn't always pretty. It's not always easy. But ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. It makes it stronger. Avoidance for many feels like control. If you don't look at the fear, maybe it'll go away. If you stay positive, if you stay busy, if you keep performing, maybe the anxiety will stop. But it never really does. In fact, the more you try to outrun the inner noise, the more persistent it becomes. Jung described this as the psyche's way of demanding wholeness. You can suppress the parts of you that feel inconvenient, but they don't vanish. They wait. They build pressure. And that pressure? It becomes chronic worry, unexplained fear, emotional numbness, panic in the middle of an ordinary day. You might think, I've already dealt with that, but have you? Or have you just covered it up with distractions that look like healing? Endless podcasts, routines, wellness trends that help you avoid the real work. Because Jung didn't believe in coping as an endpoint. He believed in transformation. And that only begins when you stop running from the pain and start listening to it. Avoidance is seductive because it feels safe. But it's a false safety. It keeps you in a loop, recycling the same patterns, reacting to the same triggers, never fully breaking free. That's why anxiety doesn't vanish with temporary relief. It fades only when the truth is faced head-on. And the truth is, you're not anxious by accident. You're anxious because there's something unresolved, something important, something alive. And it's tired of being buried. Jung often warned that anything you deny about yourself will eventually show up in your life as fate. Meaning, the parts of yourself you try to avoid will find ways to express themselves through relationships, breakdowns, burnout, even illness. Not because the universe is punishing you, but because your psyche refuses to be silenced. You weren't made to live fragmented. You were made to be whole. And that's the paradox. The moment you stop resisting the fear, stop numbing the pain, stop pretending everything is fine, that's the moment it starts to lose its grip. That's when anxiety stops being the enemy and starts becoming a guide. Because once you let the unconscious speak, it doesn't have to scream anymore. What if the thing you've been trying to get rid of was actually trying to help you? What if worry wasn't a malfunction or a weakness, but a guide, a signal flare pointing towards something deeper? Carl Jung didn't believe in labeling parts of the self as bad or broken. He believed that every emotion, even the painful ones, had a purpose, and nowhere was this more true than with anxiety. In Jung's view, anxiety wasn't the enemy, it was the messenger, not a problem to fix, but a message to read. And that message, more often than not, is this: you are not whole. Somewhere along the way, you left parts of yourself behind, not out of malice, but out of necessity. You buried pain to survive. You ignored fear to stay strong. You shut down your needs to be loved. And all of that left a psychic wound, not visible, but always felt. Worry rises when those wounds start to reopen. But here's the truth Jung wanted us to understand. Healing isn't about becoming a new person. It's about reclaiming the person you were before the world convinced you to fragment. That work is messy. It's not glamorous or comfortable. It means examining your dreams, observing your projections, and most of all, getting honest about your pain. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole by integrating every part of the self, especially the ones you'd rather forget. You don't heal by silencing anxiety. You heal by learning what it's trying to say. That tightness in your chest? Maybe it's not irrational. Maybe it's grief. That spiraling thought? Maybe it's the voice of your inner child, scared and unheard. When you treat anxiety not as a threat, but as a messenger, everything begins to shift. You stop fighting your own mind. You start listening. And that changes the relationship entirely. Instead of asking, how do I stop worrying? The question becomes, what does this worry want me to know? That shift alone is transformative. Because now, worry isn't a cage, it's a compass. It becomes a kind of emotional GPS, pointing you toward what still needs your attention. The fear, the memory, the old belief, it's not there to torture you. It's asking to be felt, to be understood, to be seen. This doesn't mean you'll never feel anxious again, but it does mean the anxiety will stop owning you. Because once you make space for all parts of yourself, even the scared ones, you take your power back. And in that space, something new can grow. Not fear, not panic, but peace. Real peace. The kind that comes when you're no longer hiding from yourself. There's a moment, subtle but life-changing, when you realize that the voice in your head isn't you, not fully, not entirely. It might sound like you. It might carry your memories, your fears, your patterns. But at its core, that voice is just one layer, one mask, one fragment of something far bigger. Carl Jung called it the ego, the surface self, the one obsessed with image, identity, safety, and certainty. But the real you, that runs much deeper. And once you remember that, everything changes. The ego wants control. It wants predictability. It wants to solve every problem, map every path, and guarantee every outcome. That's why it clings to anxiety. Because worry feels like control. If you're thinking about the worst case scenario, then maybe, just maybe, you'll be ready for it. But Jung saw through that illusion. He understood that the ego's obsession with control is actually rooted in fear. The fear of uncertainty, the fear of vulnerability, the fear of facing what it can't understand. But beneath all that noise is the self, not the persona you crafted to survive and not the ego trying to stay in charge. The self is the witness, the observer, the calm presence behind the storm. And that part of you? It doesn't need to control anything. It doesn't panic when things fall apart. Because it knows that wholeness was never about perfection. It was about presence, truth, alignment. Jung never taught people to destroy their ego. That's a common misconception. He taught us to relocate our center, to stop identifying entirely with the ego, and to start living from the deeper self. That's where peace lives. Not because life becomes perfect, but because you no longer demand it to be. You don't have to script the future. You don't have to carry every fear like it's your responsibility. You're not just the thoughts spinning in your head. You are the space behind them. And here's the twist that most people never see coming. The more you try to control life, the more it controls you. You worry about the past, hoping it'll change. You obsess over the future, hoping you can predict it. But in doing so, you miss the only place you've ever had real power. Right here, right now, within. The self isn't afraid of uncertainty. It embraces it. Because it knows that your worth, your peace, your truth, none of it depends on external certainty. It comes from being whole again. When you stop living through the ego's fear and start living through the self's awareness, worry no longer owns you. It becomes background noise, and you finally remember what freedom feels like. Most people think peace is the absence of problems, the day when everything finally makes sense, when all the pieces fall into place, when nothing feels uncertain anymore. But that day never comes. Life never becomes perfectly safe, fully predictable, or completely in your control. And that's not a flaw in the system. It's the point. Because Carl Jung didn't believe the goal was to make the world less chaotic. He believed the goal was to become whole enough that the chaos no longer breaks you. Worry doesn't disappear because you've figured everything out. It disappears because you've stopped needing to figure everything out. You've stopped letting your inner stability depend on outer certainty. You've stopped handing your power to every anxious thought, assuming it must be true just because it's loud. Instead, you've learned to listen, not to obey, but to understand. And that changes everything. Most people resist this work because they've spent their entire lives believing anxiety keeps them safe, that it's their alarm system, their mental seatbelt, their way of staying prepared. But what Jung showed us is that worry doesn't protect you. It splits you. It keeps you living from the surface while your deeper self waits in silence, unseen, unheard. And as long as you keep clinging to that voice, the one that spirals, doubts, fears, you stay identified with the part of you that's not whole. True peace comes not from fixing the mind, but from reuniting with the self. That means letting go of control. It means noticing when you're trying to micromanage life and instead saying, I trust myself to face whatever comes. It means catching that anxious thought mid-spin and saying, this isn't danger, this is memory. It means recognizing that your soul, the real you, has never been in danger. Only your ego thought it was. You don't get rid of worry by pretending it's not there. You outgrow it by becoming someone who no longer needs it. Not by becoming perfect, but by becoming whole. And that's not fantasy. It's reality for anyone willing to do the work Jung spoke of. Integration, honesty, shadow work, self-compassion. Because when the unconscious stops running your life, when your shadow is no longer your enemy, when you stop abandoning yourself to survive, that's when the real transformation begins. You don't need to become someone else. You need to remember who you were before the world taught you to be afraid. And once you do, worry doesn't run your life anymore. You do. If this shifted something in you, that's your deeper self starting to stir. Anxiety was never the enemy. It was the invitation. If this message resonated, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what part hit home for you. And if you want more content like this, thoughtful, honest, and real, hit subscribe and join the journey back to wholeness. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay honest, and most of all, stay whole.